I'm David Templeton. Welcome to Science on Screen. We're going to have a discussion of the Lorax with Paige Braddock. This is part of Rafael at home. We're trying a bunch of new things. We were hoping to do this in the theater, and obviously things changed, so we're using the new technology. But thanks for everybody for joining us. Hopefully a lot of you have seen the movie, The Lorax, and now we're going to have a conversation in a little bit. There is going to be a place where you're going to get an opportunity to participate in a poll. I will tell you about that in a little bit. And mainly, we're going to just have a really great conversation about this film, about Dr. Seuss, about environmentalism, about cartooning and illustration and the power of art. So it's going to be a good time. And we're very excited to have Paige Braddock with us. I'm going to introduce her in just a bit. I want to say a few things about this movie and about Dr. Seuss and where it all began. Today, of course, is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And in just 14 months, on June 23rd, 2021, it'll be the 50th anniversary of Dr. Seuss's book, The Lorax, which hit bookstores in 1971, followed a year later by the beloved animated TV special created by Patty Freleng, who also did animated television versions of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Horton Hears a Who, and The Cat in the Hat. I believe I saw the TV special before I read the book. I would have been 11 years old. Dr. Seuss, Ted Geisel, has said that The Lorax is his favorite of all of his books, which is really saying something. He said it was his favorite because it tackled a serious subject and made a strong environmental statement without becoming dull, which he said is the challenge. Over the years, the book has inspired a number of people to become environmentalists and forest rangers. I might have a chance to tell a story about that in a little bit, the forest ranger part. And the book has also ended up being banned in many circles, where certain folks have opposed it for being anti-capitalist, anti-logging industry, and anti-wood floor product. In fact, the National Oak Flooring Manufacturers Association, NOFMA, it's a real thing, published a book of its own in the 1990s called The Truax, in which the logging industry is defended and the enemy is an environmentalist monster called the guard bark. The controversy continued in a way with the release of The Lorax, the movie that many of you have just watched or rewatched, released by Universal in 2012. Some people dismissed it as being an attempt to brainwash children into hating industry and loving trees. That was a bad thing, I guess, for some folks, while others dismissed it as doing the exact opposite. The New York Times, in its review of the film, called it a noisy, useless piece of junk, reverse engineered into something resembling popular art in accordance with the reigning imperatives of marketing and brand extension. M's fighting words. Personally, well, I do prefer the television version from 1972, my first Lorax. I admit there are elements in this one, the kind of science fiction-y futuristic version of the world made of plastic, that I found kind of inventive and interesting and engaging. I think it's cool that they took what is essentially a fable and turned it into kind of a science fiction thing, because there's elements of that. And there's a long history of taking fables and myths and putting a science fiction spin on it. So I thought that was kind of clever. If you're going to pad the thing out, you might as well throw a science fiction twist in there. But regardless of its various adaptations, the book, The Lorax, still stands as one of the most influential children's stories of all time, named by the National Education Association as one of the top 100 books for children of all time. And in 2012, The Lorax was ranked number 33 among the top 100 picture books in a survey published by School Library Journal. So I mentioned that we're going to have this poll. So we're going to give you an opportunity at the end, at some point, we'll let you know when. There's going to be an opportunity for you to answer the question, which is your favorite version, the book, the television special, or this new version that we're going to be talking about. And that brings us to tonight's special guest. I'm very pleased to have with us the cartoonist, illustrator, and author Paige Braddock. An Eisner-nominated illustrator, as it says in her bio on the Film Center page. And for those of you who don't know what that means, that refers to the Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards, given to outstanding achievement in American comic books. She was nominated for an Eisner in 2006 as the creator of the groundbreaking Jane's World, a syndicated online and newspaper comic strip that ran for 20 years. After it concluded its run, the 20th anniversary collection titled Love Letters to Jane's World was a finalist for a Lambda Award for Best LGBTQ Graphic Novel in 2019. Since 1999, she's worked for Charles M. Schulz Creative Associates, for which she is the Chief Creative Officer. As such, she's illustrated numerous Peanuts books and even designed the official US Postal Department Snoopy postage stamp distributed in 2001. She's the author of the award-winning Stinky Cecil graphic novels about a frog and his pond-dwelling friends taking on various environmental threats in engaging, eye-opening, and usually very funny ways. The books in that series are Stinky Cecil in Operation Pond Rescue, Stinky Cecil in Terrarium Terror, and Stinky Cecil in Mudslide Mayhem. This September, we'll see the debut of a new graphic novel series for kids that Paige is doing, Peanut, Butter, and Cracker. The first installment will be called Puppy Problems. And let's bring her in. Paige, thanks so much for joining us from the wilds of Sebastopol.
Hello, really happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I can't hear you.
Oh.
Try this.
My back?
Nope. I'm
Nope.
not lip reading very well.
Uh-oh.
Let's see.
How about this? Can you hear me?
We're going to try to get
How
the
about this?
audio going here. Well, let's see. Some people are saying that they can hear both of us.
Can you hear me now?
And
How about now?
there we go. Okay, hi.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me now?
Sorry. I don't know. My computer didn't recognize my headphones for some reason.
Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. It would have been fun to do this on stage, but this is kind of the new world now. And I know you're a little more familiar with these Zoom meetings with the work you do with the Charles Schulz Group, right?
Yeah, we've been having lots of these video meetings. So you would think I would have all the technical issues worked out, but it seems like there's so many variables, you never know.
Well, I want to ask you about your first Lorax experience to begin with, before we get to talking about this movie and Stinky Cecil and some of the other things we're going to talk about. I mentioned that the first thing I remember was the TV special in '72. What's the first time you remember the Lorax?
I didn't actually see that special, and which is odd because I'm a big fan of the Grinch Stole Christmas. Like I watch that every year, but I was a big fan of the book. I think if I had to pick my favorite of the three, my favorite is the book, The Lorax. Probably because I really loved Seuss's drawing style and his character design and the buildings and I don't know. He creates these really great worlds on paper. Maybe because I'm a cartoonist, I really like the 2D interpretation of the Lorax.
Yeah, this movie was originally in 3D, which, most of us aren't getting that experience of it. I didn't see it in theaters, so I don't know what that would have been like. But so you read the book first, and I know that your history with your dad has some kind of environmental tree-loving aspects to it. Your dad was a forester, right? That must have had an influence on your reading of that book.
Yeah, he was a career forester. He retired after like 32 years, and because of his job, we always lived usually out in the middle of nowhere. We started in the Sequoia National Forest down in Southern California, and then he moved back east. But so I spent a lot of time as a little kid, not having lots of neighbors, but being around lots of trees and being in natural environments. And I do think it was really formative experience. I mean, the other flip side of that is you spend a lot of time alone, you entertain yourself. And I think that's how I started drawing comics. So, you know, when I did Stinky Cecil, I kind of brought the two worlds together.
Do you remember having conversations about it? It sparking your thoughts about trees and protection and things like that, since, you know, trees and tree management was such an important part of your life?
Yeah, it's funny. It didn't stand out to me as a different experience until I talked to people who had a completely different experience, because, I mean, we lived in wilderness areas, we lived in national forests. So, it was just part of the air we were breathing, right? It was part of all of our conversations. And, you know, when I was a kid, our vacations were always camping trips or backpacking trips or whatever. I mean, I discovered, you know, much later, that you could actually stay in hotels and you didn't have to sleep on the ground. And so you know, I don't know. I'm more of a fair weather camper these days than I was. You know, my dad's kind of hardcore. He liked to backpack and carry all your gear on your back. And even when he retired, he maintained a section of the Appalachian Trail in North Georgia, which is a wilderness area. So you can't even use power tools to like clear fallen trees or anything. Everything has to be like crosscut saws and axes, and it's an interesting thing.
So let's jump to this movie, which a lot of people have just freshly seen. We talked about it a little bit. I don't know if you felt about it quite like the New York Times person did, but what was your general take of this adaptation of The Lorax?
You know, the thing that struck me, well, that pulled me out of it a little bit, was how the main kid character, sort of his motivation, and one of the things that I felt Seuss was so good at was he would create these characters that didn't exist in reality. So he could easily share with you a point of view without you taking it personally. I feel like having a real world kid in that story sort of changed the way I interacted with it. I mean, I know the book had a kid, but it didn't seem like his motivations weren't the same. This kid had this whole preamble about, you know, wanting to win the girl over and living in this like industrialized environment, you know, completely cut off from the outside world where all the trees were cut. I don't know what you thought about it, but and I also thought there was, you know, I think because the book is so short, it's brief. So to make a feature-length movie, you've got to really flesh it out. And some of that pulled me out of the story too, a little bit. But boy, don't you hate to see those trees get cut down?
Yeah, and just the first shot of the clear-cut forest.
Yeah, you know, I've been reading for whatever reason. I've been really not because of our discussion, but have been really interested in trees lately. And have you read the book? It's The Hidden Life of Trees, I think, and it talks about how modern forestry assumed that trees needed space to grow, but then they've since discovered that trees actually support each other in a community way, a communal way. I don't know, it's just an interesting side note. So when you start cutting down or clear cutting, you really are, you're hurting the bigger forest population, right?
Yeah. There's the book out, the Pulitzer winner from last year, The Overstory.
Oh, I'm reading that actually right now.
Really?
Yeah. I'm only about 20% in that one, but that's really great too.
Yeah, that touches some of the same things about the connection of the trees to each other and the way they affect humanity.
Yeah. If you think about it, the Hidden Life of Trees talks about, which is what the Lorax was sort of speaking for the trees, right? And the trees almost need someone to speak for them, because their time scale, their notion of time is so much slower than ours, right? That we're such different species, we can't even understand them, right? Or see the subtle differences. And maybe that's what Seuss was getting at when he created this creature, the Lorax, who had to speak for the trees because they couldn't speak for themselves. Now I'm getting really metaphysical, but.
Well, last weekend I watched The Two Towers again, and you've got tree beard in the end, same thing. They're on tree time. Everything's much slower for them.
Yeah.
When when some people have tried to ban this book for reasons saying that it's anti-lumber industry, their reasoning often is that they say that the lumber industry is actually very involved in replanting, that they take that seriously because otherwise they're going to cut down the trees and they'll go out of business, like eventually happens in the book The Lorax. And yet at the time that Seuss was writing it, I'm not sure that that was happening at the level that it is now. There was clear cutting taking place and some old growth forests. So it seems like the world has changed, possibly for the better. And I wonder if it's possible that Dr. Seuss's book had a positive change on kids who grew up with a slightly different view of things because of it.
It really might have. Yeah, who knows? In 1971, I can't remember. I know that clear cutting was an issue, and you still can see it, you know, where the trees have come back, but you can see that the old growth forest around them is not quite as mature as the areas that were clear cut. I know that what my dad did for the Forest Service was a lot of, they would call it forest management. So you would, you know, thin trees in areas or plant trees in other areas with the notion that you were, you know, doing things that were beneficial for the whole area. But I'm sure their practices have changed since the 70s too.
I'm sure it has to have evolved.
Too bad we can't call my dad and ask him right now. He has a lot of opinions about trees.
I bet. Somebody who's watching just logged in with a question. Any thoughts on the movie Ferngully? Have you ever seen Ferngully?
I can't even remember that one, really. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Fairies in a magical forest. The best thing about it was there's a kind of a demented bat with the voice of Robin Williams.
That would be good.
But when you do lists of animated environmental films, Ferngully often pops up on the top of it.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about the influence of books and literature and illustrations on kids, tell me about your Stinky Cecil series. After 20 years of doing Jane's World, you kind of went in a different direction with these kids books that have environmental themes.
Yeah, I mean, Jane's World was kind of a comedy ensemble cast, sort of like Friends in comic book form, and I did sort of feel like I had told all the stories I wanted to tell with that. So, and I'm very concerned about the environment, and I started thinking about what we do and how it affects all the smaller creatures that live downstream from us. And so this Stinky Cecil actually started as like an indie comic I was just uploading it online, and it was originally titled Apocalypse Pond. And an editor saw it, Andrea Colvin, who used to work in Kansas City. She came across it online, and she was like, could you do that? Could you do a story, a full-length story with those characters? But maybe we need to change the name because I'm not sure anybody can spell apocalypse. Like, young readers couldn't spell apocalypse. So that's how it became Stinky Cecil. But it was really about sort of a science light, sort of a friendly, humorous way to get kids thinking about all the little things that we do that impact all the little creatures that live downstream from us. So usually the characters, it's, you know, Cecil, who's the main character, and his amphibian friends, and one free range hamster. There's one mammal in the story who thinks he like runs the world. He has all the toys and the gadgets and everything like that. And they usually find ways to help themselves, save their pond, or, you know, derail a construction project. At one point, Stinky Cecil gets captured by a third grade science class and ends up in a terrarium. And anyway, there's light science aspects and environmental aspects woven through each of the stories. You know, I think the goal of the last book was sort of to talk about habitat and how many different creatures depend on each other through the health of the habitat. So, like, you know, beavers and birds and lizards and snakes, and anyway, touching on the whole sort of ecosystem around a pond.
Well, in my introduction, I talked about how Dr. Seuss said that it's not an easy thing to make a statement in a children's book or to introduce ideas about the environment and not end up being dull. He hated anything that was dull, and he thought a lot of other people's writing for children was dull. So is that a challenge when you're trying to create something that actually has a message and is also just supposed to be a funny story?
Well, I think you can't focus on the message. I think you have to focus on the characters. And, you know, you basically sort of deliver your message through the growth of your character, through the maybe narrative arc that your character makes through the course of the story. So in Operation Pond Rescue, Cecil thought there was nothing he could do, that he was powerless. And by the end of the story, he realizes he can do things. So you're not making some big heavy-handed statement, but you're letting the character sort of act out and reveal what that character has learned through the course of the story. I feel like we all do this, but especially kids, I think, connect with characters, right? If you connect with a character, if you really care about that character, if you're empathetic with that character, then you're going to care about the story. You're going to care about what that character has to say, whether that's, you know, history or science or humor or any of those things. I do feel like humor is a great bridge for lots of topics. So,
well, that's one thing that this new version of the Lorax has. I mean, it's got a lot of fun.
There's a lot of gags.
A lot of gags, yeah, like 3 per minute, sometimes a lot more.
Yeah.
I think now would be a good time to put up the poll if it hasn't gone up already. And then, oh, there it is. And let's open it up to questions. If anybody has a question for Paige, feel free to log that in here, and we'll do what we can to get those answered. So do you ever imagine Stinky Cecil becoming an animated kind of thing? I mean, you live in the world of, you know, Peanuts and Snoopy and stuff, which we know all the beloved animated versions of those. Does that kind of cross your imagination as a cool thing?
It does seem like it would be cool. I mean, I feel like the Stinky Cecil characters lend themselves to sort of simple, cheerful 2D animation. When I was first sort of working on the characters for this book series, one of my friends who's an animator at Pixar had said, you know, that kids really are drawn to characters that are simple because they can, if the design is simple enough, that they can actually draw the characters themselves. And so I think that was a positive, and kids do seem to really respond to the characters. But animation is a whole other animal, and you can see even in the comparison between the Lorax book and this theatrical release, like, as a creator, you have to be willing to let go of what you've created and have it become something different in this other format. You have to collaborate with a team of people to make it happen. So in some ways, I guess I've focused on comics because you're sort of you're the captain of your own universe if you're doing a comic book, because it's just you and the characters. And animation becomes a big team effort to produce something. I mean, even Schultz, who created Peanuts, recognized that he was a cartoonist and not an animator. And I think he allowed Bill Melendez to do a lot of things and take Peanuts in directions that he wasn't able to take them in the comic strip. So, and when you talk about the difference between 2D and 3D, I mean, that's a big leap too, right? I mean, they're able to do things in CG animation that people weren't able to do in 2D animation, or, you know, it just didn't have the same effect.
Though the simplicity of the just simple drawings, even the very first Peanuts Christmas special, it's just perfect the way that is.
Yeah, you can tell they're walking on acetate, and sometimes the characters overlap and don't line up, and they're floating above the grass, and it's beautiful handmade animation. You know, there's something about that. It's hard to recreate that.
I just want to make sure that the question function is working. I haven't seen any show up. I have a little thing saying no open questions. So if any of you tech people out there watching think I should be getting some questions here that I'm not, help me out with.
I see one in the chat. Somebody is asking, Julia is asking how many cartoonists keep Peanuts, the Peanuts comic strip alive. They're actually, at the studio now, there's about 20 people working there today, but we do not do new comic strips. We work on animation, and we work on books, like publishing. But the comic strip is pretty much, it is what it is, you know. It's the stuff that Schultz created, and that we sort of maintain that as our sort of our Bible, our library. Nobody does any more comic strips, but we use that to sort of launch into product design and like kids books for Simon and Schuster and Boom Comics. And so it's funny, or not funny, but you're a creator, you create these characters that people fall in love with. I would say Seuss is in the same category, Schultz in this way. And then your characters live on without you, right? Because people have an attachment to those characters and those stories. So it's just an interesting thing to notice in the world.
You create a character and then it becomes the world's character.
That's right. You give it to the public, and like I can't even tell you how many stories I hear about people's first encounter with Snoopy and the first Snoopy plush they had and the first time they watched the Christmas special. And I'm sure it's the same for Seuss. You know, he had these like magical, whimsical characters he created that looked like nothing anybody else was doing, and his crazy houses with all the, you know, the levels and the funny looking trees. I mean, the design of those trees in the Lorax, I just couldn't stop looking at them. They're like cotton candy with like striped trunks. Genius, right? I love those trees.
Yeah, they look very edible, actually.
Yeah, you love those trees, like right out of the gate, you know?
Yeah, and you can almost see why somebody would say, I want to eat that, or I want to make something out of that.
Well, I think it was kind of genius, because if you just do a tree the way you always draw a tree, then your brain kind of fills in like, oh, that's a tree. That's a tree. Yeah, I've seen a million trees. And then, so here's Seuss, and he creates this tree that looks like some sort of whimsical cotton candy, you know, pink flavored with the, and suddenly you're like, you're seeing a tree in a different way, right? I think that was sort of the genius of the book. He made you stop and look at those trees and care about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Yvonne who's asking you, Paige, when did you get started as, it says animator, but I think she probably means as a cartoonist. My 13-year-old is a budding animator and would like to know how old you were when you started.
I think I was 7 when I announced to my parents I was going to be a cartoonist when I grew up. So I think you do sort of cartooning is one of those professions that most people come to it when they're kids because they love it, and it's kind of becomes a compulsion to draw and create characters. You know, a lot of people start out in comics and then migrate to animation, or just go right into animation out of college. I mean, now you can. There's lots of places where you can major in what they call sequential art studies, right? They didn't have that in the 70s and 80s when I was in school, but you can actually get a degree in that now.
So do you have any advice for Yvonne's kid and what to do to get started?
I always say it's like anything else you want to do that you want to excel at: practice, 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 practice. And, you know, study the work of people you admire. If there's cartoonists that you really admire, animators you really admire, you know, really look at their work and sort of deconstruct it and see what parts of it you care about. And then I would definitely keep a sketchbook and just draw as much as you can and write stories. And then anytime you have an opportunity to meet a professional working cartoonist or animator, take advantage of it and talk to them. Because I grew up in the rural South without any art programs in public schools, most of my early art training was from professional cartoonists who were willing to be a mentor to me. And so you can't overstate how important that is to young artists.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee asking what cartoon strip that is that's framed on the wall behind you.
Yeah, so I brought Captain America to the party. He's here. But that is an original comic strip from Terry and the Pirates. It's it's by Milton Caniff.
That's awesome.
Pirates? Yeah, Milton Caniff was a contemporary of Schultz's. So it's probably from the I don't know what the date on that is. I should know, but I don't know what the date on it is. Probably the 40s.
It's super cool looking from here.
Yeah, yeah.
So we got to ask just a little, talking about the environment, this being Earth Day. And here we are in this remarkably weird situation where the world is shut down and everyone's staying home. People aren't driving. The cost of oil has tanked. And the environment, they're reporting, seems to be bouncing back really fast in some parts of the world. Water is clearer, air is clearer. This is a really weird science fiction moment that we're living in, except it's not fiction.
I agree, yeah. Yeah, when you see some of the pictures of the air quality side by side, it's pretty shocking.
Yeah, well, I know you do some science fiction stuff too. You have your Martian series, and so you think about futuristic things. Is this, I'm actually surprised that what's happening now hasn't been predicted in the way that it's actually happening. There have been plenty of pandemic movies, but I don't know that anybody predicted that everybody would just be home talking to each other on computers and kind of calmly waiting it out.
Yeah, it usually goes much more horribly than this is going. I mean, the closest that comes to it is Contagion, right? Which is very similar in how it starts, but then of course society doesn't manage as well as we're managing. It's almost like, but how you're talking about how the earth, how the climate has sort of rebounded quickly. Do you ever think about like maybe the earth just wanted to hit pause for a minute and make us all stop and like just pay attention?
I want to have a really calm Earth Day. I know what I'll do. I'll send
Yeah. Yeah.
We're just about out of time, but somebody just threw in a question asking for you to comment, if you can, on the work of Studio Ghibli.
So funny you should say that. First, I want to say I think I said Terry and the Pirates, but that's actually a Steve Canyon comic back there behind me. He did both, but I got nervous and I said the wrong thing. But so 2 years ago, I was in Japan with Jeannie Schultz, and we were going to tour the Ghibli studio, but Miyazaki had recently retired, and so we didn't think we would get to see him. And then he was there when we went by, and he was working on a short film that he was producing that was going to be shown in the theater at the museum. And well, first off, his environments are amazing. Trees, grass, all these. He had all these original drawings all over his desk in his studio when we went in. And the friend who was traveling with us, the Japanese fellow who was with us, asked if we could take a picture with him. So I have a picture with me and Miyazaki and Jeannie Schultz, but I can't show it anywhere because he doesn't want it to be on social media. But the interesting thing that happened was I was standing there, I had my arm around Jeannie, he's on the other side, and I feel something touch my shoulder of my drawing arm. And I realized it was Miyazaki's hand. And I just got chills all the way down this side of my body. It was the most interesting experience.
Wow.
One of those life moments, right? I'm going to remember it forever. I immediately went back to the hotel after meeting him and quickly did this sketch and then wrote down the date, the day I met Miyazaki, and I did a sketch with the arm that he touched. I mean, it was just like, it was one of those kind of moments. But I think he's he's a master. He's just a master craftsman, and a really, I obviously couldn't talk to him because I don't speak Japanese and he doesn't speak English, but his spirit, you feel it when you're with him. He is a genuinely caring person, you can tell.
It's interesting that sometimes that can transcend language. I had the opportunity once to meet the Dalai Lama.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't talk, really. I just shook his hand, and it was the best handshake of my life.
This is what I'm talking about, right?
He was so present, and his look in my eyes. And then he went to do the same thing to the next person that he had to shake their hands. But yeah, it's a similar experience. I was one of those, I don't know if I should wash my hand.
Right, right.
Now we're all washing our hands, and people are predicting the end of handshakes. So I'm glad I got that in while we still had the opportunity. So somebody has asked for you to talk about your next project that I mentioned a little bit, but and we'll go out on that and let you have the last word there. But I want to report that according to the poll, the results are the book looks like it's 50% of the people say they prefer the book, the TV special 38%, and the movie 13%. So they're updated poll results up. Book has gone up to 56%, TV special 38%. Movies dropped a little bit. It's down to 11%.
Wow. We're all fans of the book.
All fans of the book. So speaking of books, tell us about your puppy.
Yeah, so the next it's a trilogy. And the main title is Peanut Butter and Crackers, because the three characters are, one's named Peanut, one name's Butter, one name's Crackers. And the first book is called Puppy Problems, and it's basically these two happy pets have to integrate a new puppy into their home, and then all the stuff that all the zaniness that ensues. But sort of the through line is about acceptance and about sharing and about just learning to find your way in the world, right? And create friendships. So there's a lot of humor, but I think those are sort of the overarching messages behind the stories. There's a lot of humor, actually, because dogs and cats are funny.
Yes, they are. So it's Earth Day. Any final words for people out there about the environment? Any suggestions, admonitions, words of advice or hope?
Well, I don't know about you, but during this shutdown thing, I find that it's forced me to slow down and notice things. And I've been noticing a lot of things like flowers and trees and birds and the smell of the air. And I don't know, I think if I was going to say anything, I would just say that's really a good thing. If that's a byproduct of this sort of shutdown, slow down, that we pay attention and notice our environments, that's a good thing.
Well, thank you. This has really been a blast talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, David.
And I guess that's going to be it. We are going to be doing some more science on screen in the future. We have to work that out. If you have any suggestions of movies you'd like to see that are science themed, you could throw those up there on the chat real quick. If you have a suggestion of a scientist or artist or somebody related to the themes of that, throw that on there too. We'd love to hear it. And we'll be back with more as soon as we know what that's going to be. So goodbye, Paige. Goodbye, everybody else. Happy Earth Day, what's left of it, and take care of yourselves and the world.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.